I'm excited to visit with you. I went back in my notes and I saw I was here shortly after first being appointed when this administration first began, and that was about 135 weeks ago, but nobody's counting. And that's about 107 weeks, 2 days, and X number of hours and minutes from the beginning of a second term of this administration. And when I was here, I spoke about 4 very important things, and they were things that I committed to the governor, to the public, and of course to myself and my immediate staff, that these are the 4 things I'm going to do my entire time as secretary. And should the public accept what they are and what this administration has done, we'll have an opportunity for phase 2 of these. Some of them may be the same, but I think it's important that you have some consistency in what you get out of public service. And so for me, those simple things are what I call my 4 PowerPoints. And I'm known for PowerPoint presentations, and I have one, but I'm not sharing it on the screen. But we're going to just talk about it. And those 4 things are making a case for new revenue here in the state of Louisiana. As you know, it's been nearly 3 decades, if not longer, that we've had real infusions of dollars into our infrastructure. We talked about taking full advantage of our federal resources. And as you know, a part of your gas tax goes to the federal government. And it comes back to the state in a number of ways. One is a formula, the other is in discretionary areas. And so we wanted to take advantage of that because the federal government has moved to a much more discretionary environment than we've ever seen before. And then we talked about number 3, having a balanced transportation agenda, talking about all modes of transportation because we are all integrated. I can't deal with just highways, I can't deal with just rails, I can't deal with just runways, I can't ignore the waterways, I can't discount the freight environment and what all that means, and I can't discount Mutt and Jeff, as we used to say, the left and the right foot, and how pedestrians exist in our communities and how best to keep them safe in those efforts. And then last but certainly not least, over my years in government, I've learned the importance of being more collaborative with legislators, being more collaborative with stakeholder groups, but most importantly, being more collaborative with local governments. Because I own, as the State Department of Transportation, I own 16,000+ miles of road that exist in communities all across this state. And so if we're going to make decisions that affect those communities, I want to be collaborative in those and not assume that we know what's best. And so thinking about what I talked about a little over 120 weeks ago, I thought it was important to go back and say, what have we done in those areas before we talk about how do we go forward in the future of transportation. First, when you talk about making the case for new revenue, I can tell you the one most important thing that we were able to do on day 1 is protect the Transportation Trust Fund as best we can and eliminate diversions as best we could in an environment, as you know, where we had significant budget deficits and challenges there. And so we're excited to say that we've done that and we continue to maintain that. We've invested over $1.7 billion in infrastructure since 2016, and we've done some fascinating things when it comes to innovation here in the state of Louisiana. And so in order to make a case for revenue, you have to show responsibility. You have to show that you are making good and wise decisions. Outside of the natural disasters that we've seen in August and March of 2016, I have to think about the daily routine, hurricane evacuation, freezes, ice events, having closed every interstate here in the state of Louisiana because of weather since I've been secretary. Having to close a bridge in Grand Isle, Louisiana because of ice is different. And so from the state's perspective, we have to be responsible to the citizens for that, but we've also taken on some really aggressive efforts. I can talk about the design build process from Highland to 73, which was one of the fastest that we've ever done because that project was unique and the department had already been working on that. I can talk about the Garvey Bond initiative where we're doing Barksdale project and we're doing Loyola and we're going to widen I-10 from the bridge to the split. All of those are innovative solutions that have been tools for some time. But more importantly, those projects have been on the list for the last 20 years that we've not been able to do. So we've made a case for new revenue in that we've not said here is what is a priority of this administration. Our priority was, as Governor Edwards said, let's put Louisiana first, and said let's do the things that we know we need to do. So the second one was how do we take advantage of federal funds? Well, I'm happy to tell you I talked a little bit about the Fast Lane grant that we got in the first part of this administration. That was about $60 million. And then we followed up with another federal grant that was competitive. We got $45 million for our first public-private partnership. We were one of 23 states, and I think we have the highest percentage of what we asked for being awarded. We asked for $50 million and we got 45. That does not happen around the country. And more importantly, we've been able to take advantage of what we call federal redistribution dollars. Every year we've increased. Last year it was $60 million. We hope to get up to $80 million this year in monies that are reallocated to states from other states that may not have advanced as much of their funds. And so when you say we are bringing home the dollars that we send and then some, I can tell you we've got over $100 million of money in the budget this year to work in Louisiana that was not expected to be here. And when you talk about the third PowerPoint, which is having a balanced transportation system, I can tell you we've doubled the Port Priority Program in year 1 and year 2. And we've created an Office of Multimodal Commerce that is working with businesses and industries all across the state of Louisiana. We've also taken an effort of working with our federal government to deliver public works infrastructure, meaning we've more than doubled our statewide flood control program from $8 million up to $20 million in this year. And having been in the department for many years prior to being secretary, I knew firsthand that communities around this state struggle with dealing with public works. We struggle with dealing with public works, and $8 million wasn't enough. And it took a 500-year flood and a 1,000-year flood, whatever the numbers were, to make that case. And $20 million is still not enough. Because we announced that doubling, we had over $100 million of applications from local government. So we're excited about that. We're also excited about having worked with our congressional delegation to fund projects like the Comeet Diversion Project, something that's been on the books for many, many years, but something that is now fully funded. We put together a plan that had a Plan A, a Plan B, and a Plan C for funding, and we've got a hybrid of that, and at the end of the day, we expect to have that project started next year and then finished 4 years after that. And then last, in terms of having a balanced transportation, there are those who might say passenger rail is not a priority or is not important. Well, we think it is, but we have to put it in context. This state, this governor, this administration put forth a $10 million effort to collaborate with Mississippi and Alabama to restore Gulf Coast rail between Mobile and New Orleans from an evacuation standpoint, and something that occurred pre-Katrina as a daily routine for mobility for folks. Folks that might not have a car, folks that might have a car, folks that might want to fly from the airport. We were the only state to provide its share of dollars to be able to match a federal grant. We're not foolish enough to think that we can afford it all by ourselves right now, but we put forth that effort to say, let's actually compete to try and bring that to fruition. And so when you think about other mobility solutions, I can think about that. I can also think about our effort to help bring bicycles to the Baton Rouge area with a bike share program that the department is happy to be helping to launch here in the Baton Rouge region. So when you think about being more collaborative, we talk about the 800 projects we've led, the 2,700 miles in communities, and the infra success. All of those things occurred with public input. Those are things that we've made modifications to, a roundabout here or a turn lane there, things that we've made safer in Livonia because of that public engagement. As secretary, I spent a great deal of time with our folks in public meetings, talking to folks, giving them a face that can be held accountable for decisions that the department makes, and we're excited about that. And not only are they participating and giving us their ideas, the Garvey package that we talked about, every one of those projects have local dollars invested in it. It's not just saying we want you to build this. We're saying here's $12 million in Bossier. Here's $12 million in New Orleans. Here's $12 million in Bellchase. Here's $24 million in Baton Rouge to help deliver these types of projects. And so we're excited about that. And everything I've talked to you about have been really good success stories, but there's one that we weren't so successful with, and that's with the truck permit overhaul. We made a valiant effort to fix it the right way. We weren't successful, but folks are still having those conversations. When you think about a freight industry and a freight community like Louisiana, you have to think about those that are moving things through Louisiana and that are moving things to and from Louisiana and how they all fit together. We see all across the state, the 12,000 bridges I have, the Port of Baton Rouge can't be successful if I can't get timber out of a forest in North Louisiana to get to a barge, to get to a chipper, to get to the Port of Baton Rouge. And so if that bridge at the farthest extent of that relationship doesn't work, the trees are going to stay in the forest and not make it to the port to get overseas for energy. And so we have to think about infrastructure in a very comprehensive way. So we talked about all the things that we've done well. So let's talk a little bit about the future of transportation in Louisiana. I see Secretary LaBagh is here, and we, over the years, saw our backlog decrease because of one-time investment. Well, as I stand here today, our backlog is creeping back up slowly but surely to what it was when I got there with the Blanco administration, up to $14 billion. And for the general public, that $14 billion are things that we have to do to maintain a state of good repair, things that are already built. That's not the new bridge. That's not the widened interstate. Those projects are on our wish list, and that's about $15 billion here in the state of Louisiana. So all told, you're looking at about $30 billion of things that we need in infrastructure. Now in 2017, you may remember we made a very valiant attempt, and this may be naivete on my part, but I'm committed to getting it right so we don't have to do it all over again. We put forth a very bold gas tax proposal that would have right-sized the gas tax. The 17 cents that we talked about wasn't necessarily an increase. It brings you up to where we would have been had we indexed the gas tax in 1989. That is so very important because all of the other states except for 3 have adjusted their gas tax since that time. All of those states have made continual investments in their infrastructure, unlike Louisiana. So not only are our needs increasing, but the quality of what we have right now is decreasing, which is only going to increase the cost that we have to make. And so when you think about the $700 to $800 million a year that we get from the federal government, if they do not fix the deficit that's existing in the Highway Trust Fund, the federal government will see a $35 billion reduction in what they send back to states. Now, what that simply means for those who aren't mathematicians like me is that $800 million I get every year, it's going to shrink. That's the reality. They no longer have the resources to invest the way they had been doing it previously. And what that shrinkage is going to be, what that number is going to be, depends on what efforts they make at the federal level. And there's all kinds of discussions. In the most recent discussion, as we talked about infrastructure in this administration, the presidential administration, when they first started, they talked about wanting to spend trillions of dollars in infrastructure. Today, we see a little bit of effort. We see some policy solutions roll out, but we aren't seeing real dollars. That's the challenge. And Chairman Schuster has introduced a very interesting concept, which is to raise the gas tax and the diesel tax for 10 years, but prevent you from ever charging another national gas tax again. And he would replace it with something yet to be determined, which is hugely risky. Now, it's going to force a conversation, but it's hugely risky given where we are in our country when we travel America's roads and then we go look overseas and see how far behind we are in terms of mobility, in terms of quality of work, in terms of how many people are moving across that and how we pay for it. And at the state level, we will continue to have the same challenges in terms of how we match those federal funds. As we said to the legislature and the public 2 years ago, we're going to have a hard time meeting our current match responsibilities with the current level of funding. And as it stands today, we're using close to $30 million in what are toll credits to help make us whole. Should we get that $80 million, we're not going to have any toll credits left. And we're going to be forced into a conversation of what the governor has attempted to do was make a real investment in transportation with capital outlay funds. For the first time, this administration, I didn't mention this earlier, invested money to match highway trust funds by giving it straight to the Transportation Trust Fund. That is the system, that is the adopted plan for project selection and moving things through. Those numbers are going to dwindle because of the difficulty in meeting the obligations of capital outlay with that $300 million a year. So where do we go in terms of connected vehicles? Where do we go in terms of mobility solutions? You won't go very far unless you have the base element of what you need, which is a local revenue stream. When you think about public-private partnerships, I cannot promise the world for tolling if I can't make up the other 60% of a new bridge in Baton Rouge. That is the scenario. I can't widen I-49 or build the intercity connector with a concept of a P-free because that's not how it's going to happen. They're going to need to get a return on their investment, and I have to have the full funding before I obligate that. And so as we go into another legislative session, I can't promise you that there's going to be a solution, but I don't know that we have an alternative to investing in infrastructure that's going to be sustainable in the long term. And it brings me back to where we were in 2017. If you don't have the right number, if you don't spend it the right way, the public will continue to distrust how we will spend our dollars. And you can look no farther than having a legislative process to identify projects as opposed to identifying projects and spending money as they are prepared to be spent. And so I think the solution to the future of Louisiana's infrastructure is doing what we've already done. We've made good decisions. We've invested in projects that we've all agreed, for the most part, that we need, maybe not the finer components of what it's going to look like through Baton Rouge, but we all agree that it needs to be widened. We all agree that there needs to be a new bridge. We all agree that protecting Barksdale is the way to go. We all agree that public-private partnerships are a tool. We've got all the tools. We've got all the projects. We've got all the expertise to make it happen. What we don't have is the fuel in our tank, i.e. the dollars, to deliver those things that the public is saying they want. And as Secretary, I will always be honest and frank with folks. I will always tell them what the realities are, and we will continue to close bridges if we have to make them safe. And we will continue to spend one-time money on the interstates to build them, because that's where the masses of people are going to be. And so as you travel from Lafayette down to Ascension, you'll see no less than 10 or 12 cranes on major widenings. It's all one-time money. It's all one-time money. It's not a sustainable revenue source. And so I don't believe that the future of transportation in Louisiana is going to be one-time money. I think it's got to be something sustainable. I think it's got to be meaningful, and it's got to follow national best practices in terms of how you allocate it. And so I know I wanted to talk about so much more, and maybe having a PowerPoint would keep me on track, but I think that's the future of Louisiana. We've got a tough decision to make. Maurice Lauricella, I think, is a cartoonist who did a picture of me. It was a much broader picture of me that I laugh about in the office, but it says we've deferred our infrastructure costs for far too long. And I think the longer we wait, the more expensive it's going to be. The longer we wait, the more difficult it's going to be. And I look no further than widening I-10. I think this is our third time trying to make it through that process. Never before have we had $350 million put on it. That will save the rural program, because we're going to only use $67 million a year to spread out that pain across the state. And in fact, in the rural areas for the next 12 years with Garvey, we're going to spend more money overlaying it the way the budget partition works. And so it's a wonderful opportunity to provide those solutions, and it's an even more exciting opportunity to stand here and take questions from the folks in the press. Well, I want to tell you, these are things that we're doing that we talked about doing 2 years ago. Public-private partnerships, we're well into our procurement for our first solicited public-private partnership for the replacement of the Belle Chase Bridge and Tunnel, where we have about 80 million of the 125 million, and we're relying on the private sector to come and finance the remaining portion using tolls. But also with Garvey bonds, another major tool that we've had at our disposal, but the state opted for whatever reason not to use it. And as a result of that, we're going to bond out about $650 million in Garvey bonds, which is going to equate to about a $60+ million payment a year for 12 years to be used on the interstate. And what's good is those dollars would have been spent on the interstate in the least impactful way, because it would have been spread out quite large. This time, we're going to concentrate in the urbanized areas, and as a result of that, we're going to be able to spend more of our federal funds in the rural parts of our state. So we're really excited about managing our exposure with that, all at the same time of running the risk of not having enough money to match federal funds. 10 to 15 years down the road, if we haven't addressed our gas tax issue in the next 10 or 15 years, you might as well put the closed for business sign up, because we're going to be at such a gridlock condition, both from a congestion but also from a preservation and maintenance perspective. We will be closing bridges much more frequently. We've got interstates and bridges 50, 60, 70 years old in some cases that are moving products in a much greater force right now on heavier trucks, wider trucks, more frequent loads, going over very old infrastructure. And so if we can't match federal funds in next year's budget, that's the beginning of the end, I say, because it's going to increase every year after that. And so we don't have much time to act. The department attempted with this administration's support in 2017 to pass a gas tax that would have right-sized this. We tell people if you could live off of 50% of what you made in 1989 and live in today's economy, then happy for you. That's what the state's being asked to do, and that's not possible, and it's unrealistic to think that our system will be sustained that way. Well, at the end of the day, we hope that folks come into government who understand that there's a cost of doing business, that we have saved and saved and saved and made as many innovative solutions as possible. But at the end of the day, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that we need to catch up, not 35 or 40, not 10 or 20 million dollars that you might save with one additional effort for 1 year. And that's not how you fund infrastructure. That's not how you build a system. And that's not what our neighboring states, who are surpassing us in a number of categories, including infrastructure. They've made the investment, and we've not done so, and as a result, we're seeing the results of that. They can go to dotd.la.gov, or they can follow me on social media on Twitter at OneVisionary and or at Facebook. We'll be happy to talk to you. I also encourage folks to tune into 511la.org. It's an opportunity for you to put a very specific project or a very specific region and get direct messages to your phone about projects and updates that might affect you in your daily commute. Or you can call the department, 225-379-1200.